Go. Welcome, everyone. I am so excited to invite you to my series, Professional Conversations with Friends. I am here with a very, very dear friend, Dr. Eva Marie Shivers. I invite you to pause and read her full bio notes. This is not even her full bio. These are just notes, but she's an amazing professional and person. Not only does she have 2 advanced degrees, she is the director of her own nonprofit, which we will talk about during this meeting. I also want to highlight a personal note at the end of her bio, as she identifies as a mixed race African American who migrated to the US at 2 years of age. So I think that speaks to her personality, who she is as an individual and as a woman of color. And this is also how you can reach her following our interview. And we are going to move into the interview now. So welcome, welcome, Eva, my dear friend.
Yes, this
You're a
is fun.
beautiful, wonderful friend of many, many years.
And many years,
Many
right?
years, yes. More years than we want to count. No. We met as 0 to 3 fellows, 2004, and just have a kismet spirit about this work and supporting those who are underrepresented in the field and families who are facing multiple challenges as a result, not only of a mental health challenge or an infant mental health risk issue, but also the challenge of folks who are disenfranchised, and particularly people of color. So I just want to jump right in and talk about what is sometimes hard for us to talk about, and
Yes,
yet we know we have to talk about it,
yes.
and acknowledging the trauma that is racism in America. So I'm gonna let you take it from here.
Oh boy. Okay. The trauma that is race in America. That is big. Um, so I guess I'm going to start by saying, when I was starting off on my professional career, I never thought that I would actually be, facilitating and holding space for others to have really intense, heavy conversations about race. And I went through my own, of course, awareness and introspection and transformation when it came to my own understanding about race and how it plays out in America, how it plays out in my work, how it plays out in the way I see myself in the work, and probably, gosh, I would say, I don't know, Barb, like the time that we were fellows, I think was when I really started to commit myself in a different way to naming it. But even back then, I wasn't even using the term race a whole lot. We were using words like cultural responsiveness. Remember, we did that workshop on cultural competence, or
Yeah.
the whole workshop was why we want to get away from cultural competence. So even for me back then, using that R word, race, racialized, racist, those were words that were just scary for me to say, because I knew what it aroused in my body, right? And how dysregulated I became when I thought about my own feelings and experiences in regards to race. And I imagined other people feeling the same way. And never would I want to be in front of a group of people, which is already feeling very high stakes, and then to bring up the R word and see other people get dysregulated. So I stayed away from it,
Yeah,
right?
I just want to interject for a moment because I think that is so very powerful. I love that the R word, and it is. We dance around
Mhm.
discussions of racism and racial disparity because there is an affective
Yeah.
component.
Oh, yes.
Because people get highly activated. All people of all race get highly activated.
Yes.
And
Yes.
and as a trainer, you have to be prepared for that emotional activation because it is
Right.
personal.
Right.
And
Mhm.
we need to create space to have this uncomfortable conversation because that's how you heal trauma. That's what we know is true of trauma. Go.
Yes,
Breathe.
absolutely. Yeah, yes, absolutely. And so, the work that we do at Indigo Cultural Center really evolved from the space of talking about race in very academic ways, which we still do. Research and evaluation is a big part of who we are and what we do. We believe in the power of telling a story with data, telling other people's stories through data, and not just quantitative data, but qualitative data as well. But it was very kind of academically oriented. And so what I notice is that when we do often get into conversations about race, it remains in that really intellectualized space. Okay, we're talking about race. We're talking about race. Yeah, but it doesn't get inside of us. That doesn't transform us. Those kinds of conversations do not transform us. They might raise awareness, which is maybe the first step for some of us, right? It raises awareness, but it does not transform us. So when I think about your original question, the trauma, what is it? The trauma of
Yeah,
racism
yeah,
in
we just need to
America and seeing
acknowledging
it.
the trauma that is racism in America.
Yeah.
And I use that word deliberately. It is trauma. We talk about historical trauma for different groups, for African Americans, Native Americans, Latino Americans, Asian Americans. However, I think there is also a universal experience. White folks are impacted by racism.
Hmm. Yeah, and we don't talk enough
We
about
don't
that.
talk about that. And we've
No,
all internalized these ideas connected to race that are unconscious. That's what racism is.
that's right.
It's not you're racist. That's not what we're saying. What we're saying is we live, I make that clarification for people, I'm sure you do too. We live under a system that very deliberately creates inequity, and
Yeah,
it's race-based, and we
yeah.
have to confront that. Go
We
ahead.
do, we do. And I think that there are several really key components in confronting it in order to transform ourselves, right? So
Mhm.
that we can then transform our relationships, transform our organizations, transform systems, right?
Yeah.
But I think that transforming ourselves is an essential component. One of the reasons why I really, really, really enjoy doing this racial work, and I call it racial healing work. I don't even like to call it training anymore because I don't think it's a typical, intellectualized activity, but it is transformative work. One of the reasons why I love really doing this work in the context of a mental health community, and specifically infant mental health, is
Yes.
because there is already such an emphasis on things like being present, leaning in, the power of relationships, the beauty in sharing stories, right? The recognition of trauma, the understanding that trauma lives in our bodies, the understanding that we have to name it. So those are all essential building blocks. All of the building blocks that we embrace in our field of infant mental health are
Yeah.
exactly, almost not quite, but almost matches one for one the same building blocks we need to transform ourselves, our relationships, our society, in regards to race and racial healing. And so part of that, yes, involves knowing ourselves and having these conversations and doing our own work, but we have to know our history.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we didn't end up here. We didn't just wake up
Yeah.
today.
Yeah. I want to,
Why are some groups of people always on the bottom of all those well-being lists? That
right.
didn't happen because certain people are more deficient than others. We really need to understand the history of how race became a thing, right? And
Mm-hmm.
for what purpose? And even after laws and policies were shifted, there were race is insidious. Racism is insidious. It's in the groundwater. It's in the air. The policies and the legacy of those policies have not completely been undone inside of us, between us, and we've just stopped. Well, I think back when you and I were fellows, we weren't really talking about it. I think people are talking about it
Yeah.
now more and more. I noticed, around 2016, I noticed a certain kind of urgency with people, particularly white people, wanting to really come in the conversation in a different
Yeah.
way. So I think we are talking about it, but we still need to
Yeah.
understand how we got
I want to just go back because we're both very passionate and excited about this topic, and both very involved in the infant mental health community. Go
here.
back to you spoke about transformation. So I have two questions. I don't know if we can remember both of them. One, let's think about transformation. What do you mean by that, first of all? And then two, I want to think about the introspective piece of the work. So maybe we can
Okay.
remember to
All right.
hold on to those two. Yeah.
Yes. What transformation? What do we mean by
Yeah.
transformation?
What do you mean by that? I know. It's a good question.
I've never been asked that before. Okay, what is transformation? I think transformation is not a destination. I really think that it is a process of growth.
Mm-hmm.
And when I mean growth, I mean a couple of things, like getting away from the binary of, or the linear way of thinking about growth. Like you start here, you end up here, right? So when I think about growth, I think of it in multiple ways. One area of growth is kind of how we grow to embrace and incorporate other people's truths more and more. So that's kind of the external, like, come along, come with us.
So I want to just restate that, how to incorporate other people's truths.
Mhm.
Okay, so, and I'm going to add on, that means we have to be really feeling secure in our truth
Yes.
to have a discussion that holds a different truth.
Yes.
And that also is a developmental process from an infant mental health perspective. We really want to joint attention. Hello, people know what I'm talking about out there. We need to have the understanding that I can have an idea, you can have a different idea, and neither one of us are less than because we hold a different idea. Okay, that's a huge
It's
interpersonal skill. Go ahead.
huge. And when you say it, many of us are sitting here and saying, well, of course, you're right. But it's hard to do in the moment. It's
Yes.
hard to do in those moments when we're activated, when we're dysregulated, when somebody says something that makes us feel fear, or we're in our red zone, right? We're out of our,
Yeah.
um, it's hard to do in those moments, right? And so I agree that in order to be more inclusive and kind of listen and be there for other people's truths, right, that kind of joint attention, yes, the transformation that happens inside is exactly what you just said. How do we become aware of our truths? And so
Okay.
there are four essential questions that I've started using more and more, pretty much anytime I facilitate a conversation about race, whether it's one-on-one consultation with a state administrator, or whether it's I don't know, a group, of mental health consultants, or a group of quality coaches, or a group of parents. The four essential questions that we always start with before we even begin getting into our conversations about race is really grounding, and it's centering. And the four questions, they really come from more kind of indigenous communities and indigenous traditions. And yeah. So when I read about these four questions in the context of how they were used in indigenous communities to address, maybe the word that they use in those communities is not mental health, but it's something akin to mental wellness, right?
Mhm.
And in order for, the person who is working with the unwell individual, they keep coming back to four central questions. Who am I? Where did I come from? Why am I here? And where am I going? And there are so many ways we can answer those questions. Like even right now, Barbara, if I were to ask you those questions, you might choose in this moment to go deep with it and to get really existential with it, right? To talk about your ancestors, talk about your roots, and all of that. Or you might talk about it in more of a kind of a professional sense, like, this is what I do for a living. These are my pathways to my position and how I got here to be hosting
Yeah.
these amazing
Yeah.
conversations.
Yeah. With
You know,
amazing people. Yeah.
but the point is that when we begin a conversation about race, really, like you said, rooted in who we are,
Mhm.
understanding a little bit more about where we come from and why we're here,
Okay.
it makes it so that we are less shaky and less kind of swaying in the wind when multiple or different opinions come our
Yeah.
way.
Oh, yes.
Mhm.
I hear grounding in that, who am I? Where did I come from? A sense of grounding.
Yes.
And I'm going to just add um, personal respect for my journey, for whoever you are, across racial groups, a respect for your walk, right? I came here through a journey, and that journey is powerful and has defined
Mhm.
me. Yes.
Yes, and the sharing of those stories. I used to think, when I started doing the racial equity work, I came to it as a researcher. I was never trained to be this, I didn't like go to some certification course, like, now you are a facilitator of, no, I came to it from academia. And so I had to learn how to hold space for others to do this work. And I found some amazing mentors. And for me, the learning never stops. Like, I'm always learning new strategies. I do
Yeah.
not believe in recreating the wheel. So I have amazing tools developed by other people. I just use them maybe in a unique way. But the telling of stories is a really big strategy in the social justice community that's used. And so, I would be, I think, tolerant of the
Mhm.
telling of the stories. Like, that's something we have to do. I don't know. It creates
I
community,
think,
something.
yeah.
But it's
Go ahead.
deeper than that.
Mhm.
It's deeper than that. And it dawned on me maybe, I don't know, maybe like 4 years ago, oh gosh, just the transformative nature of sharing narrative and
Right.
listening to narrative. And again, like when we bring it back to infant mental
Right.
health, I feel like that's so much of what we do with families and practitioners is we're there to hear the stories.
Sure.
we're hardwired we're hardwired to connect through stories. I remember reading something that even talked about the physiological responses that happen inside of us when we listen to a story, when we share our story, things actually shift. And so now when I think about what storytelling means in the context of racial facilitation and racial healing, stories are everything. And like you said, our journey, sharing our journey. Oh my gosh, can you imagine starting a conversation with somebody, Barbara, where like you come in the room, let's say you're at some kind of a stakeholder meeting and they're asking you to weigh in on something, right? And you come in right away and you've got these opinions and you just start talking about it, and people have their opinions, but there
Yeah.
was no opportunity to kind of say, okay, who's in the room today?
Yeah.
Who's in the room, right? Why
Right.
are we here today? Like a recognition of why we're here. Where did we come from? Like, what was our journey here? So when we share these stories or these opinions, a lot of times, I don't know if you have this experience, but I feel like I'm kind of cast as the angry brown woman, often like the only woman of color in the room, and, have these opinions. I think after a while, people kind of tune you out. But I think it's something shifts when I tell my story, or you tell your story,
Mm-hmm.
and then, or other people, then we share our opinions from that space.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my gosh, that's everything.
Yeah.
That is transformational. Right?
Okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
I love it. That is, story.
Mhm.
So important. I want to hang on to story for a moment because in my work, I'm on the clinical end, you're
Right.
on the research and evaluation end, and we're looking at the same thing, but we're
Yes,
coming at it right from different
that's
experiences.
right.
So
That's
that's
right.
lovely.
We need all those
We
strategies.
need everybody.
Right?
We need
That's
everybody.
yeah.
Um, and so we're talking a lot about story in terms of like trauma narrative, organized narrative. That's what the mental health community, psychologists and social
Mhm.
workers and MFTs talk about. But I started talking about story.
Mhm.
Share your story. Even with COVID, I've been talking about children telling their COVID story, right? I'm not calling it a trauma story. I'm like, your COVID
Right.
story. What's this like
Right.
for you? Because there's going to be diverse stories. There's not one story.
That's right.
Everybody has
Oh,
their own story, and
yes.
creating space for the fact that, guess what, my story changes. That's the other thing that is challenging, because it's like, well, you told this story yesterday, but today it's a different story.
Right.
I have a different experience today.
I know, it's
So
true. It's fluid. Just to make it
yes,
even more
yeah,
complicated, stories are not static.
they're not
Right?
stagnant.
Yeah.
So as you talk about the power of telling story, I think about the power of story as a healing opportunity for trauma.
Mhm.
And this thing happened to my people,
Mhm.
that I lives in my bones. The things that happened to my people 400 years ago, 100 years ago, 2 weeks ago,
Yes.
lives in my bones.
Yes.
And while I respect a variety of people in the United States have a painful immigration story or a painful past, that is not continually played out by systemic issues
Mhm.
that narrow where people can live, that
Mhm.
have created conditions where people of color are in the most, often in inner cities, in the most dangerous environments to contract this virus.
Mhm.
So that continued trauma,
Mhm.
which I mentioned earlier, I can feel in my bones, even though I may not live in that particular environment, I can feel it in my bones
Mhm.
that there are people who look like me who
Mhm.
are at greater risk, not because of their race,
Mhm.
but because of a system that has put them in a very narrow box
Yes. Thank you.
and limited opportunity.
Thank you. Thank you for shifting that. And I think for me, what it brings up when you say that, a couple of things. One is, ooh, um, our our predominant narrative. I think even in the mental health and infant mental health community, our predominant narrative is one of trauma, is one of pathology, is one of fixing. Um,
True.
and I don't want to minimize the impact of trauma, but I also want to remember that our approach often is to come and fix the broken individual, right? That is our approach. When we think about where our investments go, where our money, where the funding goes, so much of it is to fix the broken and unwell individual, right? It's kind of like this very micro, as opposed to like, when that webinar that the Center of Excellence hosted back in, when was that? I don't know, end of April.
End of April. Yeah.
Yeah, they use the metaphor of the groundwater, right,
Yes.
and the fish. And when we think about most of our strategies for intervention and working with children and families, oh, let's go save that fish. Let's go fix the fish. As opposed to, wait a second, all the fish in this area of the lake, they're like upside down. They're sick, they're nasty, and what is happening? And if we just focus on the fish, you can see how these really negative, deficient attitudes, what is wrong with those fish, as opposed to what the hell is wrong with the water that they're swimming
Yes.
in? What about the ground, where the water is kind of pooled and sitting, and what's in the soil,
Yeah.
right? And so, thinking about that metaphor, as an infant mental health community, I think I don't think we abandon our approaches, with holding space for others and listening to stories and that beautiful relationship work that we do. But we have to find a way to integrate this larger kind of systemic, contextual, historical way of thinking about the fish, right? And then to kind of also, I want to steer us away from a complete deficit narrative.
Yes.
And so let's take COVID, for example. We're all seeing the numbers, the disparities, where COVID is hitting the hardest. And it's so interesting because I know when the coronavirus first came to the United States, we're like, oh, this is an equal opportunity virus. We're all in this together,
Yeah.
It's not the viruses. Well, yeah, they are blind to color. It's not the viruses don't have this kind of insane intelligence where they're gonna no, but the virus is very smart, and it found our fissures. It found the cracks in our system. It absolutely traveled along the pathways in our system, that kind of illuminate where the gaps are, where the fissures are, where the broken pieces
Yes.
are. And that is what
Yes.
this virus has really illuminated for us,
Yes.
right? And
Yeah.
it found it. It found it. The virus found our fissures. It
Yeah.
found where we're broken. It found where our system is broken. It didn't find broken people. It found a broken system. That's what it got inside, And so in thinking about, well, how do we crawl our way out of this? How do we prepare for the second wave if the second wave is coming? How do we prepare for the next big thing that happens, right? So much of I'm attending lots of webinars and conversations, like, what's
Yeah.
policies? What are we going to recommend? And so much of it is still on fixing the children, which we have to pay attention to what's happening with children. But if we don't expand our lens to think about communities and neighborhoods and access and resources and really get back to transforming systems, this is just going to keep happening.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, and I totally agree. Totally agree. Want to underscore, this is not a place for an individual to start introducing guilt. Not that you can't feel bad
Yeah.
about inequity, but
Yeah.
you didn't do it. That's not what this discussion is about. This is about highlighting, as you said, the fissures, the brokenness that already exists in our system. This is about highlighting where there is already inequity, and it is taking a huge toll. So the question for all of us, not just folks in those communities, but all of us, is, are we committed to a different experience for everyone in America?
Yeah.
Do we really want to make sure that all people have access to healthcare, have access to clean water coming out of their tap, have access to education that is sensitive to their child's experience? And I just want to add one more thing about the fixing the defective child. Yes, I agree. And we have this strength-based model in infant mental health, which looks different to different people. So I like the idea of celebrating people's strengths. And sometimes that looks like, oh, you did this well. I think we need to also honor the adaptive capacity of people, which I think is a strength. So I challenge many of my mental health colleagues to look at what they're calling pathological or misbehavior and seeing the strength in that. Because perhaps the behavior we're challenged by is a behavior that is necessary for that child.
Yes, adaptive. Yes. What are our family's adaptive strategies? I was, I don't know what I was on. I was on a call or a webinar or something, and one of my friends and colleagues, Rosemary Allen in Colorado, one of the things that she talked about was, let's back up a second. Let's not assume that every single child of color, like you said, has had the same experience. What is the story? And so I think part of our work is to gather those stories. This is not a monolithic narrative for Black people or people of color. It's not a monolithic narrative. There are going to be many, many narratives. And within those many narratives, there's a recognition that a lot of children, I don't know if you've been reading all the articles, incidents of abuse or neglect coming up, as families are stressed about work and job and constant exposure to, potentially getting the virus, it's very stressful. So we're worried about children in that aspect. And also children have been immersed with families and within their culture. And so what will come out of that, right? So, the work that I do, a lot of it is in early care and education. And, we talk, we've done some studies on cultural continuity between home and school. And we see continuity between home and school as a source of strength. We also see children's ability to learn a different culture in childcare or preschool also as a strength, right? And so, but when we think about the fact that children have been at home, with, if they speak a language other than English, immersed in that language, maybe their extended family has been with them a lot and they've strengthened their relationships with their aunties or their grandparents, so also paying attention to what else has happened during this time. Like, the trauma is there, yes, the hard things, and what else has been there?
Yes.
What else has been there? And using those stories, using that attitude of it's all of it. It's not just one single narrative. And I think we have a danger in our infant mental health community to focus so much on the trauma, and we want to be responsive to these racial disparities that we're seeing in outcomes. But I think we forget to widen our lens also, to not just think about systems, but to also think about experiences as promotive, right? And as a form of resilience.
Exactly. Well, and we talk about relationships as the key to development and resilience and, social emotional strength and healing. And I do think there are wonderful relationships and opportunities for connection that people are celebrating during this COVID-19 crisis. I see parents, playing with their kids in the parks and communities in my neighborhood more. And I think some, I don't know every parent, but some parents who are home and able to work might have more emotional energy for their children. Some parents who are home and aren't able to work, because I know that's a huge stressor on a lot of families right now, can still push into quality time with their children. And we know in infant mental health that quality time with your children is school readiness. Everybody wants to, I get my kid ready for school. Love your child, spend time with your child, sit with your child, play with your child. Yeah, read. And I don't want you to read to teach them language. I want you to read to create a connection, a relationship. That reading happens to be a vehicle for the relationship. So this is a great time, parents, to be in relationship with your kids, to celebrate connection, to be connected in conflict, to be connected when there's incongruence or dysregulation. So many times our kids are isolated when they're dysregulated in academic settings, and our kids need connection when they're dysregulated for any reason, whether it's dysregulated about an academic challenge, about a racial disparity, about bullying. Any reason a child is dysregulated, they need emotional support and connection. And parents, you can give that to them right now. That's one of the things I keep saying all the time. More connection, more emotional support. Be with your children. They need you so much right now.
Yeah, and I love that you said it. I mean, it doesn't always I think we hold ourselves to such high standards when it comes to being good parents, good caregivers, whatever that means in our minds, our construction of what that is. But I also have to say that, yes, there's going to be conflict, and that's good too. Zainab Berenjen, one of my mentors and friends and colleagues, one of the things that she said in her training for the emotional availability scales is, she says, when we're doing these observations and studying emotional availability between caregivers and children, she's like, just pray for conflict. Pray for conflict.
Yeah.
Not in a mean way, but kind of like there is to understand what happens after the conflict can be such a beautiful thing. She says there's beauty in repair. And that's like my mantra. Like, I have a 9-year-old son. I don't know if you know that Elijah just turned 9 yesterday.
Unbelievable.
He's 9 years old. I know. And I keep reminding myself of that. Like, yeah, we're going to have conflict,
yes.
We're together all the time.
Yes.
And everybody's stressed, and he's stressed, and he's lonely. Well, now he has a dog, so maybe not as lonely, but now mom is stressed because she's got a,
mom's stressed because now you have a dog.
And all kinds of things. But no, I keep reminding myself, like, there's beauty in repair. Like, he's going to learn so much about himself. He's going to learn so much about me and our relationship and the way loving relationships work because of the way we deal with conflict, the way we come back together after repair. Right?
Yes.
Right. And again, I think, but in order to be present to that, we have to take care of ourselves. So for me, that means yoga, meditation, a quiet walk. If I don't do that consistently, if I miss it for 4 or 5 days in a row, I'm not going to be present to those moments of repair and use that as an opportunity for him to really understand what this relationship is about. Right. So that's another big theme, is how do we take care of ourselves in all of this?
We are gonna need to wrap up. So I'm gonna say one final observation of from what you just said,
No,
ask
we
you
could
for
keep
your
talking
final thought.
forever,
I know
right?
because we could go on for 3 hours,
No, we
and I don't
will.
think people want to watch us that long. So I do have to, but I think the yes, the challenge of repair of conflict, the learning through conflict, and the coming together for repair. I think that's what's missing in our narrative as a nation around racism.
Ooh.
We have not come together through the conflict and worked towards repair.
I'm gonna write that down. I don't want to
Write
forget
that down. You
because
can run with that,
yeah,
please.
because I want to examine that a little bit more. Yeah,
I think
yeah,
as a nation and also as individuals, we need to say, look, inequities, I get it. I'm not mad at you. It exists. Let's come together. And
yes,
this COVID might be the moment
yeah.
that we can say, you know what? I don't want to see my neighbor harmed in that way just because they are of a different hue than I am. I don't want to see that.
Mm-hmm,
How do we say, yeah, the conflict is real and we want to come together?
mm-hmm,
We want to
mm-hmm.
come together. So your final thoughts, my brilliant, beautiful friend, brilliant.
The final thoughts. I would probably say, I think it's important. A lot of us do feel helpless right now. Especially those of us in the field of education or infant mental health, we're doers, we're helpers. We got into this field to save the world. Many of us are feeling helpless because we now are working from home where everything is very virtual and distant. I think for those of us who are still longing to share, number one, I think we can bear witness to the suffering that's out there. And it is a hard thing to hold, and many of us do feel a lot of guilt, and I think that's okay. We hold it. We're there. The grief that happens by watching and bearing witness to what's happening out there, and also on the other hand, there's gratitude, right?
Yeah.
For those of us who still have a job, for those of us who are able to be still in our homes and spend more time grounding and centering, that is a gift. And so many people I'm talking to are feeling both, the grief in one hand, gratitude in the other. I think those multiple truths are there. They just are. They're okay. I think, again, transformation from the inside out. What was Gandhi say? Be the change you want to
Yes.
see in
Be
the
the change
world.
you want to see in the
I
world.
didn't
Yeah.
understand. I had a magnet on my refrigerator. One of my friends gave me. I knew it was a beautiful quote. I didn't really understand it. I feel like now I'm starting to understand it. The transformation really has to happen within
Yeah.
us in order
Yeah.
to meaningfully transform our relationships, our organizations, our society, our systems. We have to embody that change. What does that mean for you? What does that mean
Wow.
for you, Barbara? What does that
Yeah.
mean for me? What
Yeah.
does that mean? It's
Yeah.
the pathway is going to be different. But I think if we're committed to doing that, then we're going to start to see some change.
Yeah. So as we're closing, I want to say thank you, thank you, thank you. I think
Fun.
I know for those of you watching, the word of the day is transformation. And it doesn't start out there, right? It starts in here. So very powerful.
Yay.
Yes.
Aw.
If you like this video, share it with friends. It is free for your use. And we invite you to use it as a learning tool. Also, you can plug right me. You can subscribe to my channel. You can follow me on Facebook and Instagram and all those things because we're got to do that thing. Thank you, Eva. Thank you. Bye-bye to
Oh,
all my
thank you. Bye, everyone.